Tania. I think Tanya's waving at us.
All right, Tania, go ahead.
Hello, Brad. I'm really honored to listen about you. I know your story is inspiring. My question is directly, I'm an African woman from Portuguese-speaking countries, and I do feel that we don't have an entrepreneurship ecosystem. So talking about the emergent economies, what do you think we have to do to bring ourselves to the board? Because this is the challenge that we really have. It's not only about the capital, it's not only about the knowledge, and we really have a weak ecosystem, but it's also about the soft skills. But how can we bring us to the top of the cake and say we are here and we want to be part of the process? We are able because we have more than 200 million people avid to do things, creative things, and we want to be part of the process of impacting the world. So what we have to do as emergent economists?
Well, I think in places that are emergent, there's some very interesting lessons. The first to recognize is that in the first book that I wrote, the Startup Communities book, I came up with something called the Boulder Thesis that has 4 principles for building a startup community. And the key of those 4 principles, I'll just quickly dash through them. The first is that the leaders have to be entrepreneurs. The second is that you have to take a long-term view, at least 20 years. This stuff takes a long time. The third is you have to be inclusive of anyone who wants to engage. And the fourth is that you have to have activities and events that engage people in entrepreneurship. In the new book, The Startup Community Way, we go a lot deeper into that and extend it against the backdrop of how complex systems work. And one of the key things there, and this is very true in emerging economies, is the activity comes from the bottom up, not the top down. And the challenge for so many things, and it's one of the challenges when we're talking about the entrepreneurial ecosystem and the feeders, university, government, organizations to help entrepreneurship, they are very used to organizing things from the top down. And entrepreneurs are very much about starting something where nothing existed and then building from there. And so when you recognize the sort of collision between these, what you find is in a lot of places, you have a lot of well-intentioned people who are trying to organize and do things from the top down rather than support from the bottom up. And the magic trick, and if you look at countries, Israel had great examples of it in the 1980s. A guy named Chris Schroeder wrote a book called Startup Rising, which is about emergent entrepreneurship in the Middle East. And he wrote it in about the same time I wrote Startup Communities, 2011, 2012. And if you look at those books, what the governments did was they generally allocated some resources, and then they kind of got out of the way. And they allocated those resources not to cronies, not to their friends, but they allocated those resources to some successful entrepreneurs or alongside some other successful entrepreneurs that had some money. And then they just sort of let it be emergent. And I think it's especially powerful right now with the ubiquity of technology, although they're not evenly distributed around the world, but the internet is very available in many emergent economies in a way, and cellular telephones totally skipped over telephone infrastructure, telecom infrastructure in so many places around the world. I remember going to Africa in 2000, and there were no landlines, but there were lots of cell phones even then. And just kind of trying to figure out how to get that entrepreneurial energy from a few people who have experience to be the leaders of everybody else from the bottom up who's interested in engaging that way, and not fall into the trap of trying to manage and organize from the top down.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Brad. Now let's read another question. That's from Noreen Kotikian. What would be your advice for smaller startup